first of all, thanks for joining us, and let's just start with what it's like to be back in Morgantown after all these years and everything you've done. What's it like to be working back here in Morgantown?
Well, you know, Morgantown and the university have changed dramatically, I think, since I was a freshman here in 1978. The city has grown and developed. The university has become a much more sophisticated place, I think, in many respects. And it is much like a homecoming to be able to come back, particularly after, you know, being overseas for 10 years and down in Texas and doing all the things that my wife and I were able to do. So it's a great experience to come back. I'm delighted to be back in Morgantown. It's really always been one of my most favorite places, you know, a special place in my mind and in my life. And so it's just a nice time for me right now to be back here, and I'm looking forward to getting my wife and at least two of my kids up, you know, at the end of this school year.
Now, you do have two children at Stanford.
Correct.
You've got your son Andrew, your daughter Mary Ellen. First of all, do you get to see many of their games?
I have at this point seen 2 of Stanford's 4 football games. My wife has seen the other 2. We sort of try to trade off, you know, based on all the other things going on in our lives. But I'll probably get out to see maybe 4 or 5 of his games. My wife will see, I think, the remainder of the games. My daughter's playing volleyball at Stanford, so there are a couple of weekends where they're playing volleyball on a Friday night and then a football game on a Saturday, but it'll be much more difficult to get to a lot of her games because they're typically Friday and then Sunday, and those are often, in my case, travel days if I am getting out there. So, but thankfully with the internet and, you know, all this video that you can get and listening to, for example, my wife and I listened to Stanford-Arizona game on the radio over the internet this past Sunday. Our daughter was at the start of the game and got a lot of playing time, so that was kind of nice. So we'll get to see enough, put it that way.
Yeah, you're keeping in touch. Now, how's this east-west commute working for you? How do you squeeze it in when you do go to those games?
I can honestly say I have the airline schedules down by heart in terms of, you know, leaving Pittsburgh or other spots. You know, thankfully we have a number of Thursday and Friday games this year, which would allow me to jump on a plane on a Friday afternoon or a Saturday morning, depending on the West Virginia game, to get out to California in time. Or, as is the case this week, we have a bye, which is opportunistic in the sense that Stanford is up at Oregon, big game. You know, I think it's College Game Day's featured game this week, so I can get out there on a Friday and hopefully see Andrew Friday evening a little bit, and then watch the game on Saturday, come back home on Sunday. So that's my life in the fall of 2010.
Now, does Andrew ever ask you for advice?
No. Really? I made the decision, a very conscious decision, back when he was in maybe a freshman year of high school, that I would not offer nor would I give him advice on football. He had great coaches growing up in Houston, you know, when he was playing high school football. You know, the myth is true about Texas high school football. So he had great coaches, and I thought to myself, he needs a dad more than he needs another football voice telling him to do X, Y, or Z. Anybody can be his coach. Only one guy can be his dad. So I think when he and I speak, which is relatively often, we talk about everything else but football. And I think he needs a little bit of a, you know, safe harbor where he can, you know, talk to me, talk to, you know, his mom, siblings, without having to worry about football, because that's, you know, as you know, during a season as a quarterback for a, you know, sort of a prominent team, that's a almost 24/7 job.
Do you see many similarities between his style of quarterbacking and your style when you were quarterback?
You know, I suppose there are some. I mean, DNA is a you know, is a strong component, obviously, you know, in any sort of athletic family. But I'm not sure I'm the best one to answer that. The game has changed so much since I played college football in the 70s, early 80s, and it's, you know, effectively 30 years later. Obviously, and you know, offenses are different. Passing games have developed. I mean, I see a couple of things that he does well that I think I did relatively well. One of which is, when you're playing quarterback, you have to be very decisive. You don't have a lot of time to think about what you're going to do. You have to make quick decisions. Hopefully you make good decisions, but you really have to make split-second decisions. I think I was fairly good at that, and I think Andrew, certainly from what I've watched over the years, is very good at kind of making those quick decisions, and that's helpful when you're playing the game.
Do you see personality similarities too? I mean, he's playing so well, but he seems to be like you in that he seems to be trying to keep a pretty low profile.
Well, he doesn't like a lot of attention. I think he, like every quarterback who's ever played the game, realizes it's a team game. There's only so much you can do without the guys around you and the coaching staff and all that. So I think he likes to deflect criticism to his teammates. It's one of the reasons I think he decided to go to Stanford, is that it's not a big state school where if you're the quarterback, you're the big man on campus. There are literally, in his dorm floor, there are Olympic gold medal athletes, that nobody knows. There are people who've, played with the New York Symphony. I mean, there's some really talented, students out there and student athletes out there. So Stanford is a nice spot in the sense that people sort of leave them alone and don't really pay too much attention to it, because they all have their own accomplishments, quite honestly.
I know you mentioned in high school you left the coaching to the coaches. Did you ever coach him or your other kids in other sports when they were growing up?
I coached, for a long time, basketball primarily, all four of my kids. I did coach Andrew for 2 years in Pop Warner, which were the first 2 years he played football. First 11 years of his life we were living over in Europe, so he didn't really play any football. And then we came back to Texas in 2000, and I coached a couple of years at Pop Warner for him, which, of course I coached him then and did a lot, but I realized he had some, a pretty good skill set and would go on to develop, and that's when I, realized at some point I'm going to not be his coach, I'd prefer to be his dad.
Well, you mentioned your time in Europe when you were working with the NFL. 10 years, that's a long time. I bet you have to have some interesting stories of I imagine life in Frankfurt is quite different than life in Houston or life in Morgantown.
Well, we did. It was funny because we went over there. Andrew was maybe a 1-year-old or so, and 3 of our 4 kids, the other 3 kids were born over there, and we spent 10 years. I went over expecting to be there maybe a couple, 3 years, but it turned out to be just both professionally a great experience as well as personally, because I've got German heritage. My mother was born and raised in Germany, and I speak the language. In fact, I was a German minor here at WVU, and I'm a history buff. And of course, anybody who appreciates history would love spending 10 years in Europe, particularly on an expense account, in the sense that I was working for the NFL and was traveling all over the place in Europe. I was sort of their point guy to start all these new developments and work TV contracts and create licensing programs over there, and obviously run the NFL Europe League. So it was a great experience. We had a lot of fun. The best thing about it was that my 2 older kids, the 2 that are now at Stanford, Andrew and Mary Ellen, were old enough to appreciate all the travel we did. I mean, we jump in the car and drive to Paris for a weekend. We go skiing in the Alps. It's all 3 or 4 hour drives, like driving from here to Washington D.C. Or from here to Cleveland. And so I think they were old enough to appreciate the fact that Europe is different, that the Italians and the French and the Germans and the English all have their quirks and their different sort of relationships and rivalries, if you will. And so I think that was very, very gratifying that they had a real chance to see a good bit of Europe and kind of appreciate what it is. In fact, they both travel now on their own when they have free time over to Europe, visiting relatives and some friends that we had made over there. So that's a real nice legacy of the decade that we spent over there.
How is the NFL in Europe different from the NFL here? I'm sure there's
no comparison.
Yeah.
I mean, the NFL here is the most successful sports league. And arguably, our national pastime. People say it's baseball, but geez, over the last 20 years, the NFL is beating baseball in every metric, whether it's TV viewership, interest level, the fan sort of affiliations. It is our national pastime. In Europe, and really the rest of the world outside of the U.S., professional football, our professional football is an afterthought. Soccer is what drives Europe and the rest of the world in terms of their viewing interest. Europeans look at American football at the NFL and kind of scratch their heads and don't get it because it's our game. We developed the game here. We've really not made any serious attempts to export the game. I don't think, quite honestly, that we'll ever see American football, be sort of successfully established anywhere outside of North America, Canada, certainly in the U.S., but Mexico or Japan, other places where the NFL has tried to establish a beachhead, they have to a certain degree, but it's still looked on as sort of an oddball, an outlier, something that's a little bit different, something quirky, something those crazy Americans like to do, but not something that the Europeans or the South Americans or the Africans will ever really pick up.
So how did you deal with that challenge, trying to make it?
Well, my goal was to, and my responsibility was to develop a league over there and develop a business. And in certain markets we did. We had an unbelievable business going, particularly in Germany with our German franchises. It didn't work in Spain. It didn't work in England. And there are sort of cultural reasons for that. I could talk for hours about the reasons for it. But what we had to do, quite honestly, was package the sport to appeal to Europeans, and that meant really selling a lot of the sizzle and not the steak, as they say. The Germans, for example, loved stupid halftime shows. They liked the fact that there were cheerleaders, which is unknown to their soccer community. They liked the fact there were pregame parties. They had never heard of tailgating. And one of the most successful things we've ever done in this country is introduce tailgating. I mean, what can be more fun than a beautiful, fall afternoon with a bunch of friends and you're cooking bratwurst and drinking a beer and having fun before the big game. So we had to really emphasize all those things and kind of package the sport with all of the surrounding elements to make it much more appealing. And that worked in certain markets, and other markets it didn't. And it was really all about sort of the cultural willingness of a German or a Brit or a Spaniard to sort of accept Americana, because that's really what we were selling. But it was a fascinating marketing experience, and I'm grateful I had the chance for 10 years to sort of be at the forefront of this movement. And I learned a tremendous amount about marketing and packaging and branding, and what you really have to do is you look at a product and try to figure out how to sell it, how to monetize it.
So, I mean, you've done so much in your career. I mean, not just in Europe, but with the Houston Dynamos. And what do you consider, looking back on your career so far, your greatest accomplishment?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I would consider anything yet a great accomplishment. I think the best is yet to come right here at West Virginia University. I think we've got some tremendous upside with our athletic programs. We've had some great history, if you think about it, over the last 70, 80 years, particularly if you look at football over the last 20, 30 years with, coaches Nealon and Rodriguez, and now Coach Stewart. But I think the best is yet to come.
Yeah, what do you have an accomplishment in mind that you're hoping to?
Well, we have a couple of goals here. One is fairly simple. We want to be 100% Mountaineer, and we break that down by saying we want all of our sports teams to be in the top 25, and we want 75% of our student athletes to graduate, to walk away from this university with a meaningful degree, to go out and compete in the world, because they're our best ambassadors. And that's 75 and 25 is 100% Mountaineers. So we want to achieve that goal. More importantly, we want to win national championships. We've done that with our rifle program, which is one of the things that I think I'm certainly most proud of, being an alumnus of this school. But we want to win national championships in a variety of other sports. We've not done that yet, and I think we need to, and I certainly won't be satisfied until we're able to accomplish that.
So when you were an athlete here, what was your favorite memory or your greatest memory when you were an athlete at WVU?
I think the thing that was most special for me was to have the opportunity to open up the new stadium. People forget, if you go back to the mid-'70s and think about West Virginia University football, we had Old Mountaineer Field, which was a neat little spot, but it wasn't a great recruiting tool, and certainly wasn't one of the top 10 venues in the country. But if you think back in the mid-'70s, it wasn't a given. It wasn't predetermined that West Virginia University football, that Mountaineer football, would be at this state in 2010, where we've been a perennial top 15, top 20 program. We've played in BCS Bowls. We've had great players like Pat White and Steve Slayton and all that, playing for national championships, literally. That wasn't a given back in 1975. We easily could have become a school like Richmond when it comes to football, or Wofford, or some of the old Southern Conference teams, Furman, teams that we used to play, back in the mid-'70s. So two things happened, to take what was the case in 1975 and build on that to the juggernaut that Mountaineer football is today. One was building the new stadium, which was an absolute necessity. And I thank those folks who had the vision to realize, hey, it's worth the money. We don't need the golf course anymore. Let's build a stadium here and really create something that's going to last a long time. And the second, of course, second piece of that was hiring Don Nealon, who really came in here and built a solid foundation. I mean, he's an architect, and the man built a solid foundation that, you know, we're still benefiting from that. So I think having the chance to play in the new stadium and open that up and sort of in my own mind realize how important it was to get that piece of infrastructure in place, and then of course to have a couple of years of playing for Don, you know, in that new stadium and being, you know, one of the first to sort of build that foundation, I think in my mind was the most memorable thing that I can, you know, that I experienced as a student athlete here.
Is there a particular game that still stays with you today that you played in?
Oh yeah, there were a lot of great games. The Peach Bowl when we knocked off Florida was good. I mean, that sort of was a little bit of a shot across the bow, I think, across the country in terms of, hey, West Virginia can play with the big boys, and we got a coach now who doesn't, you know, who bows to no program. We're going to go ahead and take on the big boys, and we're going to beat them. Next game was, of course, Oklahoma. Jeff Hostetler, you know, took the guys out to Norman and you know, sent a second shot across the bow. So, you know, the Florida game in my mind was a lot of fun. But there were a number of games. Playing Cincinnati in that opening game wasn't a memorable game necessarily, but we won. You know, we got Mountaineer Field kicked off, new Mountaineer Field as they called it back then, kicked off in the, you know, on the right foot. And there were some nice beating Maryland my senior year, which really was a prelude to us being able to beat Penn State and beat Pitt down the road. Those were schools that had better talent, quite honestly, than we did. And we couldn't even think about beating Penn State until we could take care of a school like Maryland that back in the day had a very strong program. Jerry Claiborne, the big, strong, wide tackle 6 guys that they had, a tough team to score on. So there were a lot of you know, a lot of memorable games. But I think ultimately it was really the opportunity to open up the new stadium that was special, not just to me but to everybody in that team.
So now, can you tell me something that Mountaineer fans would be surprised to know about Oliver Luck?
Something that Mountaineer fans would be surprised to know. I'll tell you one thing that would probably surprise most folks is that I actually enjoy gardening.
Okay. What, vegetables, flowers, the whole gamut?
Flowers, yeah. I'm not much of a vegetable gardener, but living for, you know, as long as we did down in Houston, where it's really a hothouse climate, I've got, much like Vince Dooley, you know, the old Georgia coach who has written books about, you know, about gardening in the South. I've actually become somewhat of a green thumb kind of guy.
Well, have you had much time for gardening since you've been here?
Not quite, not quite. But we'll get the garden going. I think next summer. That'll be my target date.
All right, we'll be looking for that. Just one more question. When people are watching this story, what's the one thing, what's the most important thing you want people to know about you? You want them to know and remember?
You know, I think what I suppose I would want people to know is that I really believe that we've got a great opportunity here at West Virginia University to build on the successes we've had in the past, but to take our athletic program, the 17 sports we have now, and perhaps, you know, additional sports down the road, because obviously we're all familiar with the fact that we had to drop some sports at the beginning of this past decade. But I think we can take our program and really move it in a big way, move it forward and take it to, you know, really to another plane, because I think there's so much potential here. We've got some great coaches, some great young coaches. This is, I think, going to be a very special time over the next 10, 15, 20 years, because I want to stay here a long time to really build a program that is second to none in terms of intercollegiate athletics.